thank you all for attending and give you a warm welcome to this reset conversation with Dr. Maria Roca, who is going to talk to us about eco-spirituality and how it relates to climate change. Some of you that are with us today may already know that the Southwest Florida Research Center is dedicated to finding workable solutions to the root causes of our environmental issues, particularly those that address clean water and rebuilding healthy soil. We're a not-for-profit organization for about 2 years now with the aim of mitigating or reversing the effects of global warming, which are showing up here in our bioregion. We make our home at the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Fort Myers, which is on Shire Lane in Fort Myers. The Reset Board that are here today, there's many of us that are, maybe if we all just kind of wave so people know who we are. We were just a group of ordinary people, and we still are very ordinary. And we came together 3 years ago because we were concerned about how climate change was affecting us here in Southwest Florida. And we were intending to prove the famous anthropologist Margaret Mead, but she was right when she said, never forget that a small group of concerned citizens can make a difference, for indeed it is the only thing that ever has. And so we've been working on that quote and we are making a difference. We see that now, and especially when people like you show up. So Holly, why don't you pull up the graphics so people see what RESET stands for? There we go. Restorative, ecological, social, economic, and transformation. And that last word is transformation. That is transformation of people's ideas about climate change, but transformation starts within each one of us. So thank you, Holly, for posting that. So now I'm going to introduce our speaker today. Her name is Maria Roca, and many of you on here already know that she is one of Florida Gulf Coast University's founding faculty members. She's also a board member of RESET. She serves there as the chair for the Department of Integrated Studies and as an associate professor of Integrated Studies. She's also the director of the Roots of Compassion and Kindness Center and serves, as I said, on the board of directors for Southwest Florida. And she's also a Green Faith Fellow. So go take it over, Maria.
Great. Thank you so much. I can't begin to tell you how honored I am that you're welcoming me here tonight to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is eco-spirituality. As you all know, this is called a reset conversation. And I do hope that after I talk for a bit, that we will engage in some lively conversation for the remainder of our time together. So Linda already told you a lot about my background, and one of the things that was included there is that I was a founding faculty member here at Florida Gulf Coast University. And I came here 25 years ago in great part because of its sustainability mission. She also mentioned that I am a Green Faith Fellow. So back in 2008, I had the great honor of being a graduate of the first class of Green Faith Fellows. So I have been deeply devoted to eco-spirituality for most of my life. My eco-spiritual roots were planted in a mix of my Roman Catholic upbringing and in my childhood outdoors. Faith in the natural world have always been inseparable to me. From childhood, I felt a deep call to care for God's creation. And I believe we all have a call to honor and care for the health of Mother Earth in all that we do and in all that we are. I also believe that one of our greatest tools in doing the necessary work of eco-spirituality is storytelling. And we must tell these stories every day, in many venues, and to whoever will listen. If we take a minute to reflect, we'll realize that we are all shaped by stories. We need to better understand why specific stories have been so resonant for us. And we need to learn to craft eco-spiritual stories that resonate for others. If we don't, I fear for the future of life on Earth. This evening, as people who appreciate the power of a great story, who are concerned about the planet, I want to challenge you to journey with me to address the question of how we can create more compelling stories that will awaken people to make a deeper commitment to creation care. Father Gregory Boyle, in his inspiring book, Barking to the Choir, The Power of Radical Kinship, reminds us, and I'm going to speak a lot from a Christian perspective because that's my background, but I hope you'll all see the transferability of all these ideas. So Father Boyle reminds us that Jesus never said to his disciples, praise me. He said, follow me. And from a Christian perspective then, creation care requires us to follow Jesus, and this requires us to act, not just to talk about the environmental crisis and the damage being done to God's creation. I believe this same call holds true in all faiths and in all ethical perspectives. As a lifelong Roman Catholic, as I mentioned, I'm going to speak primarily from the Christian eco-spiritual perspective. But I hope that all of you will see this transferability of these ideas to other spiritual, ethical, and moral perspectives. And of course, one of the main techniques Jesus used to teach people how to follow him was through parables. And as we know, these are stories with a moral and with a call to action. An understanding of the values inherent in the stories that shaped us will help us learn what it will take to create the modern day ecological parable. So as I said, we've all been shaped by stories. So in preparing for tonight's talk, I spent some time reflecting on the stories from my childhood that shaped me. Some of these are my family stories, and some are the stories from my Roman Catholic faith. I was particularly interested in identifying where the roots of my own deep creation care were born. What I discovered was that there was a great deal of overlap in the themes from both arenas. For example, both of my parents experienced great hardship growing up. My father, truly the most extraordinary human being I've ever met, was placed in an orphanage at a very early age because his mother died of tuberculosis when he was just 2. So my family actually carries the legacy of an earlier pandemic. My mother was from Italy, and her town was leveled by bombs during World War II. I remember her stories of fleeing her home with just what they could carry, hiding for months in the mountains, and only having chestnuts to grind to make bread. Both of my parents knew what it was like to have absolutely nothing. And they often shared stories with us about these challenging times. As a result, they taught us not to waste anything. I bet you all remember this, right? We had that ball of twine in the drawer that was accumulated from the string around the pastry boxes. You didn't throw anything away. There was a shoe repair and an appliance repair shop in every neighborhood. We used things until they were truly worn out. We repaired items rather than buying new ones, and we were taught not to want more than we needed. These are rare messages today. Along with these family stories were those I heard every Sunday in church about the importance of caring for the poor, being stewards of the earth, and appreciating of all of God's creation as sacred. I particularly love the story of Noah. For people who know me, you understand why. I have 9 animals in my home. It's partly why I'm doing this from my office today, so that the birds aren't chirping and the dogs aren't barking. But so I particularly loved the story of Noah and the care he took in collecting animals to bring onto the ark so that they would be saved from the flood. I also love the image of the farm animals and their shepherds gathering around the manger to see the baby Jesus, a story easily lost in the modern image of Christmas as a holiday about consumerism. Both collections of stories are deeply rooted in my consciousness and inspire me daily to live lightly on this earth and to continue my work in eco-spirituality. And so I invite all of you to reflect on the stories that have shaped you and that have moved you to action. Which stories influenced you the most? Can you identify why the theme of a particular parable or biblical story resonated for you? What are the family stories that shaped you? I'd like to invite you to begin to ponder these questions of how we create and tell the compelling creation care story that will move people to action. And at the end of my talk, I'm hoping that many of you will be willing to share your answers to these questions. An understanding of the values inherent in the stories that shaped us will help us learn what it's going to take to create the modern day ecological parable. So let me share an example. Sorry. So let me share an example of how one might reimagine a biblical parable as a contemporary eco-spiritual parable. Perhaps one of the most famous biblical stories is that of the Good Samaritan. So let me share that with you. In Luke chapter 10, Jesus tells this story. Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be walking down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day, he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. 'Look after him,' he said, 'and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have.' Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers?" The expert in the law replied, "The one who had mercy on him." Jesus told him, "Go and do likewise." I share this parable because I believe we can use it as a metaphor for how we're treating our planet, our home. The man who was attacked can be seen as the earth. The robbers are humans who are beating the earth and leaving it half dead. And most people, sadly, are like the priest and the Levite, who just walk by, ignoring the suffering of the earth. But then there's the Samaritan, the one who sees need, feels pity, and acts. We need to be the Good Samaritan for care of the earth today. We need to be the ones who have mercy for God's creation. But this isn't easy to do. In fact, the question of whether or not people of faith are likely to act when seeing someone in need was tested at the Princeton Seminary. Researchers John Darley and Don Batson asked seminary students to prepare and deliver a sermon on the parable of the Good Samaritan. They presented each seminarian with one of three situations as they were about to leave to walk to the site where they were going to speak. So the first group was told, "You're late. They were expecting you a few minutes ago. You better hurry. It shouldn't take but just a minute." This was what was called the high hurry condition. The second group was told, "The studio assistant is ready for you, so please go right over." This was the intermediate hurry condition. And the last group was told, "It'll be a few minutes before they're ready for you, but you might as well head on over. If you have to wait over there, it shouldn't be too long." This was the low hurry condition. On their walk to the site, each seminary student encountered a victim in a deserted alleyway, just like the wounded traveler in the parable of the Good Samaritan. Now remember, they were going to speak on this parable. This victim, an associate of the experimenters, appeared destitute, was slouched and coughing, and clearly in need of assistance. The seminarians were thus offered a chance to apply what they were about to preach. Can you imagine what happened? Only 10% of the high hurry group stopped to help. 45% of the intermediate group stopped, and 63% of the low hurry group stopped. The researchers concluded that being in a hurry was a more powerful motivator than the theme of the importance of helping others about which they were about to preach, thereby confirming the moral of the parable. I share this study with you because I believe the researchers' conclusions are relevant in a conversation about why so few people are actively engaged in addressing the climate change crisis. We are in too big of a hurry. We're too busy dealing with the realities of our daily lives. As the researchers noted, the perception of time pressure or having limited time resulted in behaviors incongruent to their education and career, the devotion to help others. They go on to explain that feeling rushed causes a narrowing of the cognitive map, which results in not noticing what is really important. They observed As we make our way through life, not only do we not stop to help others, we also do not stop to help ourselves. We neglect our own needs. We fail to nourish ourselves. We surrender, we settle, we lose hope. When it comes to creation care, do we perceive ourselves as too busy, too hurried, too rushed to act? But when we think about time, we also know that we have limited time to address the climate crisis. One only needs to look at the devastation caused by the wide variety of extreme weather events here in the United States to see with our own eyes how serious the problem is. Ironically, right before we started the talk, I saw the headline from the New York Times talking about the flooding in St. Louis, the breaking of records of temperatures across the country and across the world. We need to create a feeling of urgency to help our wounded planet. We need to become environmental good Samaritans. So how do we do this? One of my great inspirations in looking for an answer to this question is Pope Francis. In his ecological encyclical Laudato Si, he argues that all is not lost. In a media landscape saturated with apocalyptic messages, Pope Francis's message is more hopeful. He believes that human beings, while capable of the worst, are also capable of rising above themselves, choosing again what is good, and making a new start, despite their mental and social conditioning. Laudato Si has such a profound rhetorical impact because Pope Francis brings the ecological crisis to life in terms that are comprehensible to people of all faiths and those of no faith. Fundamental in Pope Francis's perspective is the idea that Earth is our common home and that it must be treated as such by all humans. We must capitalize on the Pope's work and take control of the stories being told. Otherwise, as the Pope says, the advertisers and of course the popular musicians and filmmakers will be the only ones creating their version of compelling stories, not the teachers or the spiritual leaders. Pope Francis shares the concern of the Princeton researchers who believe that spiritual values are too easily lost in the hurry of modern life. Gus Speth, former dean of the School of Forestry and Environmental Studies at Yale, has been widely attributed to say, "I used to think the top environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. But I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy." Speth went on to say that to deal with those issues, we need a spiritual and cultural transformation, and we scientists do not know how to do that. So, who are the people who do know how to deal with the issues of selfishness, greed, and apathy? I believe it's all of us, the storytellers, the teachers, and the spiritual leaders. And we must persuade more people to live every day in a way that treats Earth as our common home, and that the solution, though unfamiliar, is the only hope for the future. Pope Francis believes that we must bring the whole human family together to seek a sustainable and integral development, for we know that things can change. In all communities, compelling narratives are needed to achieve the ecological conversion called for by not only Pope Francis, but the leaders of most major other religions. This need was articulated by Jesus himself when he said, "I speak to them in parables, because while seeing they do not see, and while hearing they do not hear, nor do they understand." Jesus understood the power of a well-told story. The example of Jesus's teaching through parables may hold the key to inspiring the ecological conversion. We're invited to consider how creating modern-day ecological parables can help us live creation care. As outlined by Father Jostrom Carithodem, a central member of Pope Francis's ecological team at the Vatican, these stories need to connect to everyday life, be nature-based, include the struggles of ordinary people, inspire a desire to listen, and be clear about how people should respond. I believe this bears repeating. These stories need to connect to everyday life, be nature-based, include the struggles of ordinary people, inspire a desire to listen, and be clear about how people should respond. As proposed by Pope Francis, the responsibility to craft and tell these stories is shared by all people across all groups within all organizations. Compelling stories can create the paradigm shift envisioned in Laudato Si. There are more platforms now than ever to share these well-crafted stories, to create modern-day parables. Through education, storytellers are trained. Through media, stories are shared. Churches have long been an important venue for the faithful, for the envisioning of a society to which people want to belong. Father Carithodom believes the highest purpose of communication is creating values. I said this a number of times already. Humans are, after all, storytelling animals by nature. So stories are essential in understanding how we make sense of the world. Humans make sense of the world around them and determine what is real through stories. These stories become the basis of the actions we take. Stories need to be coherent, and they need to be viewed as truthful and reliable. The values in the story need to be consistent with a person's own experience. Stories that motivate people to act must represent part of an ideal vision of human conduct. Stories are empowering because they're open to everyone. They do not require special expertise. Narratives contribute to our moral development, and we construct our own stories that indicate who we see ourselves to be as we present ourselves to others. This in turn helps people integrate their stories with the stories of others, creating a sense of identification with those who share their values and ideals. This is where great potential lies with Laudato Si. New narratives can be crafted that are compelling, liberating, inspiring, universal stories that move people to action. To be effective, these stories will need to be shared on multiple platforms. Once these stories are crafted, we must help people integrate their own stories with these new eco-spiritual parables. Narratives are powerfully influenced by the culture within which they are embedded. As a result, these narratives also have a profound impact on how individuals create meaning and which narratives individuals will choose to embrace or reject. So for example, if a young person's been raised in a green household and has parents who embrace a sustainable way of living, the ubiquitous cultural narrative of consumption may easily have greater influence than the parental message. The green script simply does not have the cultural heft of the more popular consumption narrative. Roman Catholic churches may have more influence to advance the call of Laudato Si for the truly devout, but most people, faithful and secular, are far more influenced by the ubiquitous cultural narrative that ignores the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. Unfortunately, the current narratives about consumption and sustainability tend to be dualistic in nature, a pleasure versus pain narrative whose cultural weight still tends to fall on the side of consumption as pleasure and sustainability as sacrifice. There are still very few compelling cultural narratives that support and encourage sustainability as a desirable choice. Rather, the sustainability construct still tends in the direction of fear, pain, and the surrender of comfort to save the planet. Without this more compelling construct, it will be difficult to turn the tides to advance the themes in Laudato Si or to create the powerful eco-spiritual parable. At the same time, most of the scientific evidence warns that if we do not turn this tide, humans will find ourselves in great danger. Pope Francis believes that we can create stories that can shift human thinking and ultimately behavior towards seeing sustainability as the way forward for a habitable and healthy planet. We can take the ideas in Laudato Si and develop them into modern-day parables that will have similar impact to those in the Bible. Many of the ecological stories in mass media to date have been apocalyptic in nature. Even the beautiful films of Hayao Miyazaki, for example, Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, Spirit Away, Princess Mononoke, or the now classic animated movie WALL-E, envision survival after an environmental catastrophe. In other words, the environmentalist is presented, in other cases, the environmentalist is presented as someone to ridicule. For example, Elena in the remake of the TV series One Day at a Time is made fun of when she promotes recycling and is mistaken for Heidi when she goes trick-or-treating as Greta Thunberg. One more hopeful recent example is in the second season of the Netflix series The Politician. While running for New York State Senate, young candidate Peyton Hobart is inspired by the passion of young environmentalists and shifts his campaign to focusing on sustainability. The campaign then is successful in registering young voters, and he wins. The season ends 2 years into the future when he's successfully made changes to public transportation, the energy grid, and housing that have significantly reduced greenhouse gas emissions. Though not religious, the story embodies realizing themes in Laudato Si. An ecological conversion may be taking root. One of the biggest challenges we face in creating these stories is coming up with ways to promote values that resonate with the audience. If you value the ability to consume promiscuously, to buy whatever you want, whenever you want, to always have the newest, the most, the best, then an ecological story promoting a core value to reduce consumption will not resonate for you. In this case, we need to look for other tools. Father Josh Carithodum's wonderful book, The 10 Green Commandments, may be of some help. He talks about a third green commandment where he says, embrace an ecological spirituality. He believes this may help us tell a different story that focuses on what we value in our faith. If we can use this as a ground to then promote the fourth green commandment, which is recognize that the abuse of creation is ecological sin, and then we can incorporate values rooted in your audience's faith, this might then resonate for certain audiences. You can then keep going and progress to stories that promote reduced consumption. Mass media has the potential to embrace and promote the core themes of Laudato Si in movies, television, and on other mass communication platforms to create stories that educate and inspire people to action. These stories can be shared in schools, in churches, and in homes. They can help people hear the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor, and they can inspire actions just as parables have done for thousands of years. Like my earlier efforts to reimagine the parable of the Good Samaritan, let us consider what other compelling parables or cultural stories we can revision into stories that promote creation care. Let us all heed the call to action and become Earth's modern day Good Samaritans. And so now I want to turn this over to all of you, to invite all of you into the conversation to answer some of the questions I posed earlier. That is, which stories in your life have influenced you the most? Why do they still influence you today? Were there particular stories from your own spiritual background, whether they be parables, biblical stories, from whatever spiritual background you're from, that also shaped why you act the way you do in the world today? What are your family stories that shaped you? And how can we take all of this and turn them into compelling creation care stories that will move people to action? So now let me turn this over to all of you.
Thank you, Maria. Gosh, that's like hanging on your every word. And I wrote those things down that you repeated. Um, the story that I relate to most is the Good Samaritan. That's the one that you've used. And I would guess that all of us on the reset board would probably most relate to that one also. It's very easy to see Earth as the victim, and it's very easy for most of us to see many in Southwest Florida just brushing off by the side of the road, thinking that there's always tomorrow, things will get better, somebody else will do it, I don't have to.
Fareed Zakaria, I think it was just this weekend on his Sunday morning show, talked about exactly this, what you're saying, Linda. And that, you know, we talk about these goals that are 10 years in the future, 15 years in the future. And he said, we have to stop doing that. The problems are now. They're right here. They're right now. And he talked about the story of the boiling frog. You know, I think a lot of us have heard that story. We know that idea of, you know, the frog being put into the cool pot of water and then raising it 1 degree, 1 degree, 1 degree, 1 degree, until the point the frog is no longer capable of jumping out. And then he's dinner. Right. And that, you know, if we aren't starting to realize that we're really close to the place where we can't jump out anymore. And I mean, I want to believe that we can do this, that we can, but we've got to retell the story. I really, you know, that Gus Speth piece really moves me, where he says it's about greed. It's about, you know, that the scientists know, they tell us every day, and we're not listening. We're just not listening. Go ahead, Holly.
Sure, a couple of things. One is that I got a few messages that some of you are having trouble turning your video back on, so I'm trying to help you with that. But Maria, while you were talking, it was so eloquent, and you were talking about hurry and rushing, and immediately one of my very favorite stories of all time came up for me, and that's from Aesop's fables, The Hare and the Tortoise, because it makes me think of the Reset Center and all of our climate change work too. We feel this sense of urgency, but if we run too fast, we're not going to stop to pick up the little pieces that we need to pick up along the way. And so I think that's a really good allegory too, not only for us in our little group that are going, God, we've been together almost 3 years now and we're not already a big organization. Well, we need to take one step at a time, just put one in front of the other. And that's why I love that parable for climate change work, that it's kind of like that old Donovan song for all you baby boomers, The Season of the Witch, where he says, you've got to pick up every stitch. You've got to pick up every stitch. And I feel like that's what we're doing, maybe starting in our own households, our community gardens. And yes, we need to move fast, but we also need to move mindfully. And to me, the tortoise represents mindful movement. So that's my little 2 cents. And I'm going to, oh, good, Fred, I just see your face now. If anybody else is having trouble turning your camera on, let me know. And what a great conversation. Thank you.
Does somebody else have another story? Another parable that has touched you?
I do.
Yes,
Yeah.
Barbara.
And Mary Tracy has her hand up too.
Barbara, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Excuse me, I have vocal cord dysfunction. We've had wildfires where I am at, so I'll try to project. I live in Alaska, so I was born and raised on the East Coast in the Boston area, Cape Cod, and came to Alaska when I was in my mid-20s. And I'm a counselor. I've just newly retired, or 3/4 of the way retired. And to do this very work that you're talking about today, because I think somebody said we have to add TS. I was tired of seeing myself just talking. I also listened to the stories of a lot of young people in therapy, and I saw a lot of potential, a lot of love, a lot of despair, because we are not acting toward a meaningful existence. We are so disrespectful of our life as a community. So I thought, well, I'm 75. The next 10 years, if I have 10 years, I'm going to spend it trying to create in my own area an awareness. And why do I think this way? Because I was very lucky as a young counselor to end up working with Native elders. And from village to village, they put Western counseling surrounded by Native traditional healing practice. So I was a token Western counselor, and I had these elders around me. I learned from them. And one thing I learned is every meeting, no matter what it was, we thanked the earth we were standing on for upholding us. We thanked the river for being full of fish in this season. There was just an environmental awareness. We thank the great creator for providing us with all this nourishment. It wasn't like a religious thing. It was just like, if you're going to gather together as people, you have to know where you are. And so I think no matter where you are located on this planet, you can do the same. The other thing was this awareness of the ancestors. I live in Anchorage, so people come in here for meetings, but we're on Athabascan land. So no matter who's coming in for meetings and stuff, and even if you're a non-native meeting, it can happen. People go, well, we need to thank the ancestors of the Athabascan people whose bones make up the very cells of this land we stand on. Now, this sounds really kind of strange, but it really isn't. It happens in all sorts of meetings. And when you were talking about how do we communicate to people a new story about our relationship to Earth, these very simple things came to me. And to begin meetings with, let's start by remembering what a beautiful day it is in this land that we stand on, and the power of the seasons to renew us. And we can do that anywhere at any meeting, and people will go, yeah, we don't have to call it spirituality, although it is spirituality. We can do that. The other thing that the Native people, and I don't want to talk too long, because I worked with elders, I had this one elder that always got called out by Washington, D.C. to speak at a meeting on traditional healing practices. And so he would stay at my house when he came to Anchorage. And he finally asked me, he was trying to communicate to non-Native people the idea of how human beings are part of the earth, not people who just are separate and living on this planet. We are animals and we're part of the earth. Our consciousness is part of the earth. And he was having trouble conveying that to his audiences when he talked about healing. And he kept on asking me this question: what happened to Western people that they forgot this? And so I have thought that question all along, ever since Maynard Eakin posed it to me some 25, 30 years ago. And he would do it over and over again. So these are, what have my people lost, and why did they lose it? And what do we need to do to reclaim it? Because we're people of the earth and we already have it. It's just somehow forgotten. So I'll leave that question with you.
So, Barbara,
what needs to be remembered?
It's so interesting. I'm struck by what you just were saying, because a number of years ago, I taught a class called Earth and Spirit with a colleague of mine who is a potter. So the earth is everything to her. It's her world.
Yeah.
And so we would start the class asking our students, are you on the earth or of the earth?
Mhm.
And it was such a fascinating conversation. And then we would have them write an essay about it. And what was so stunning was how many of them said, I hate nature. Mary's nodding. I see my friend Mary Walsh nodding over there because she teaches colloquium at the university. And I know that, these are things that we hear from our students. They say, oh, it's hot, it's sweaty, I get dirty. They do not see the outside world as what they are part of. They've got this interior view, and it's worse now because now they're also in the 2 dimensions of the screen so much of the time.
Yes.
So they aren't even moving around their homes. They're just like plunked in front of a TV or, of a computer screen. And I think this is a dangerous moment, but at the same time, you began by talking about what you're hearing from young people. As a professor, I hear this all the time, that our students feel disconnected, they're despairing, they're depressed. Maybe it's because they're not connected to each other or to the natural world. If that's part of what we need to rebuild, is that connection.
Mary Tracy Sigmund, you have your hand up for quite some time. Would you like to unmute yourself and Speak, please.
Yes, and I'm sorry I'm a little dim. I had my eyes dilated this morning, so I'm keeping the lights down low. But I really do. I love Barbara's Native American, the indigenous stories. I think they are wonderful to include in this type of a project. I just wanted to share a parable from the Buddhist tradition. It's not specifically about the earth, but I think we could be adapted to that. It's from the Lotus Sutra. It's called the Parable of the Burning House. And the burning house is our world. And the father who owns the house, and that would be the Buddha, but he could be any great spiritual being, sees that his children are trapped in the house and they're just totally deluded. They're having so much fun with all of their games and their pastimes, and they're just having a ball. And they don't realize that this house is on fire. Our earth is on fire. It's burning up. And he wonders how he can persuade them to come out. He knows he could carry them out, but he would like them to come out on their own accord. He wants them to do this for themselves. So he must sort of create a device, almost like a trick almost, to get them to want to come out. So he says, I have all of these wonderful playthings for you. I have an ox cart, a bull cart, and a goat cart, and you can choose whichever one you want, but you have to come out of the house right now. And the children finally hear
Groceries will begin in
this
15 minutes.
message,
York Chapel.
and
Groceries will begin.
like the greedy things that we all are, they want to have one of these carts. So they toddle out of the burning house. And as they come out, they say, okay, now we're out here, Father. Where are the carts? And he says, well, I have something for you that's even better. I have a much better cart for you than the ones you even imagined. Even if you want to say it was a Maserati or a Tesla or whatever, I've got something even better. And that was in the Lotus Sutra. That is the Bodhisattva way. That is taking care of one another, taking care of our earth, being part of that. So I think even though it's not specifically a parable about the earth, it could be adapted to that. So I mean, I think all of these religious traditions, as Maria says, I think have parables or stories, or that we can use, adapt to kind of get our message out. So I just wanted to share that with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Tracy. Joe, you had your hand up. Did you want to say something? Unmute.
When Maria was talking about students, it reminded me of a study hall class that I had years ago. Study halls oftentimes are a royal pain in a teacher's butt because they're not your students. You don't have a grade to hang over their head. They don't want to be there. And this particular collection of students was a real ornery bunch, to be quite honest. And they didn't make things pleasant. I came upon a solution. I would simply take them outside to sit on the bleachers. And all of a sudden, they became very civil, very pleasant. Just being outdoors had such a positive impact upon them. They may indeed say they don't like being outside, but I can't recall ever taking a class of students outside who didn't prefer that instead of being inside in the classroom. I think it's just a little story that says something about how we have an innate inclination to be intimate with nature, biophilia. The other real quick thing is that Maria, what I find to be one of the most powerful books in the Bible is the book of Job. It's a very, very modern book because it asks a lot of very difficult questions like, where the hell is the justice in this world? Job is really a very admirable character. I mean, he says, God, let's have a trial. You defend your case, I'll defend my case, and then finally God puts him in his place. But the point I'm trying to make is he doesn't get it until he basically until God speaks to him out of a whirlwind, until he has a firsthand of experience of the divine directly with nature. Everything else he'd ever been taught, including the Bible, the scripture, didn't come close to a first person experience of the divine, which he gets in nature. And I'm hoping that happens with us regarding our climate efforts. There's a gigantic awakening and revelation. Thank
It's
you.
funny, Joe, you say that. One of the stories I didn't tell was what I always say is where my true love of the natural world was born, was when I started riding horses at 11 years old and had that first connection with a horse where we breathed. You know, people who are horse people know this, where you breathe into their nose and they breathe back and you develop that connection with them. And I remember at 11 just being stopped dead in my tracks and thought, we're one. And, you know, if everybody could have a moment like that, it would change everything. It would just change everything. Right. Fred's got his hand up.
Yes, he does. Fred.
That was just wonderful, Maria. Well, our friend Paul Hawken has written a book on regeneration, and it's not really a parable, but it's a frame that allows for us to kind of check ourselves. And it's about, giving to life, nurturing life, or taking or destroying life. And it's just the more I sort of reflect on that, it's just it's almost like a sharp knife. I mean, you can think of it in kind of global terms, and you can think of it in very personal, immediate terms. And is what I'm doing now contributing to life? Is it nurturing life, or is it taking? And the consumption, if you're conscious about it, it's you think about the natural resources and the poor wages of people that made it. There are all kinds of ways in which it takes life. I love what Joe just said. I'm about getting kids outside. I'm a sailor, and the image of sailing and the metaphor of sailing, the story of sailing, puts you in a oneness with the natural world, because to do it, you have to know the wind direction. You have to know the tide. You can feel the tide in your buttocks. And it encourages you to relate in very immediate and intimate terms with the people that you're sailing with. You have a goal, and there's something about being out on a boat in the water that is transforming in the way that Joe, but maybe not as dramatic as Job, but it is. Certainly it's a wonderful metaphor. And I saw just finally a bumper sticker today here in Maine. It says, "Do you know your farmer?" And that if we know our farmer, we appreciate the source of food, the creation of a local sustainable food system. And we're connected to the earth. So sort of the two areas of sort of farming and sailing are ways of creating stories that lead to the goal that we're seeking to achieve.
Okay, I see that we have 4 hands up, and we've got 8 minutes. So Linda, why don't you go ahead, please?
All right. I just wanted to call attention because a lot of people don't read the chat when you're engrossed in the conversation. And Honorine has a lovely comment. It says, "There are so many stories that came on my mind as I was listening. However, I am reflecting more about the story of David and Goliath. In this ecology justice journey, there are so many obstacles and so many avenues of feeling powerless in the face of a big threat such as climate change and global warming. But our respective stones of any size are what it takes to stop the harm. I am feeling challenged and inspired. And then I want to call attention to Donna Roberts, who is with us today, who has a film, and she has put it in the chat. And she says, all indigenous traditions hold nature as sacred. My work with elder women leaders of the Afro-Brazilian, I can't get the word out, tradition have taught me so much. Perhaps my film about this wisdom tradition can inspire. So her, the link to her film is in the chat, and that was my, those were my comments. I just wanted
Okay.
so other people didn't get missed.
Thank you for calling attention to those things. And thank you folks for putting those things in the chat. Ann Smith, please take it away.
Well, everything has been wonderful. I grew up that I've heard so far, and I just say ditto, ditto, ditto. I grew up on a farm. My horse was my babysitter. My horse taught me everything, totally protected me, threw me off when she wanted to go back to the barn, but never where I'd be hurt. I've been a sailor, so I understand the whole thing about who's in charge. Because when you sail, you know only God is in charge. You are fine-tuning the sails. You are sailing with all of the elements. And then the last thing I wanted to say quickly is I believe there's a tipping point. And I'm part of the Million Circle, the 100th monkey. We don't need 100% of the people on this planet to believe in climate change, but we can give them stories that they're attracted to, that they love, and that they will. And I do believe there is so many resources, so many people out there who are working on making a difference. So I think the tipping point is here on consciousness. It just doesn't make the news.
Thank you, Ann. And thank you for everything that you have ever been and done. So many wonderful things. Mary Walsh. Unmute yourself, please.
Does she need help?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Maria. This was great. Two things I just wanted to mention briefly is Bill McKibben refers to David and Goliath when he talks about do the math when 350.org, and he was speaking at a church and he says, well, you know, I like that story because I know how it turns out. And I think a lot of us connect with redemption stories, knowing that humans are fallible, and that idea of coming together and beating the odds is really exciting and appealing, and can even connect to the American mythos of kind of the love of the underdog, the wanting to try to do the impossible. And that was something that really resonated with me a great deal in the conversation. And then the second thing I just wanted to bring up briefly is when Maria was talking about not just words, but actions. And I was thinking about the Pope is, I think he's still in Canada right now, apologizing to Indigenous First Nation peoples about the church's role in some of the schools that were very harmful and pull the children away from their culture. And, you know, to see the Pope humble himself and apologize for actions that were in the past, I think can be an inspiration to people as well, and thinking about not just about arguing about versions of history, but wanting redemption for any injustice, and being part of that, I think, is really inspiring.
Thank you very much, Mary. And
Gary, can I just take a quick minute and respond to John?
please do, Maria. Yes, please.
Says whose comment in the chat is that the counter narrative from self-identified religious believers often includes references to God's will, end time, and second coming, which will not elicit constructive action. And then there's the passage, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it. How do we respond to these? The first thing I say to my students all the time is, yep, he told us be fruitful and multiply. We did that, success. Now we need to follow a different message, right? That one we got. I suspect if he came back down now, he'd say, okay, stop. Okay, that's enough. You did well. All right. And I think, you know, some of those other messages come from some very specific sects of Christianity, certainly not what I come from. I mean, we were always taught that God helps those who help themselves. It really wasn't this sort of always God will provide. That we didn't hear that. And, of course, it comes partly from my upbringing, a mom who worked very hard to make sure there was enough food as they were up in the mountains. So I think that I think there are ways to respond that don't deny somebody's faith, their Christianity, but that also modernizes. I mean, that message was sent when there were about 5 people on Earth. And now that we've got well over 7 billion, it's time to rethink that one. So.
Hopeful that the Webb telescope, by helping us look really, really, really far out, will help us look really, really, really deep as well. There was a book in the first Whole Earth catalog that showed that visually, showing 10 times each time moving away from a man who had a fly on his shoulder, and then 10 times closer into the fly. And they were the same picture. So we have a lot to learn from what the Webb is going to be teaching us over time. And for me personally, I have a story from, and I know we're very close to time, I'll do it as quickly as I can. From when my son was 10 years old, he won a BMX bicycle race because the young boy who was in first was playing to the crowd and didn't see my son coming up on his right-hand side. And my son won the race by about a wheel. And we took a lesson from that. And that is, in the race of life, you pedal until your rear wheel is across the finish line. And so many of us are taking that as a lesson. We are pedaling hard until our rear is across the finish line. So at our ages, we can just keep on going as long as we can, making sure that we are doing the best that we can and incorporating the help of younger people so that they're taking the same message. This has been fantastic. Maria, thank you, thank you, thank you.
And I want to say before we end, I make a mention. Fred mentioned our friend Paul Hawken, and I may misquote Fred, but it's in Regeneration, and I think it's in Drawdown, where he says, our greatest weapon against climate change is our hearts. Open them. So thank you all for coming. And I want to call attention to, you can sign up for our newsletter, for a Reset newsletter, and stay abreast of all of our things that we have coming up, because we have more Reset conversations that are upcoming. Anna, if she's still with us, is our September 20th. Are you still with us, Anna? Maybe she said she was going to be listening. She might not. So anyhow, she's our September 20th. And then Holly, who's the gentleman that we have? Elfenbaum?
Yes, we do. And I posted that in the chat. It's Mike Elfenbaum, and he's an awesome person and environmentalist, and he's involved with work on Lake Okeechobee, and he's going to talk about some solutions that he's working on removing a lot of the invasive plants without using Roundup and turning all of that into fertilizer, organic fertilizer. It's an awesome solution, one of many, but he's going to really articulate that. So it should be a very good conversation with him, and that's a month from now.
And Joe, I'm wondering if you can take just a minute to say something about what you've been working on so hard. Unmute yourself.
I put Right to Clean Water website in that.
Oh, okay, did you? Okay.
But Joe still might want to say something.
I will say that eco-spirituality has to take some sort of concrete form in the end. One concrete form is signing that petition, Right to Clean, Healthy Waters. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Maria. This has been absolutely superb.
I'd like
Very inspiring.
I'd like to give Casey just a moment. You're going to Egypt in, when is it, November or October, for COP28?
Yeah, November. And this year it's in Egypt, in Sharm el Sheikh on the Sinai Peninsula. And we are planning to broadcast again every day, as we did last year in Glasgow for the Waterkeeper Alliance and the public. And with my compadre, who's maybe still on the line, John Capice, and definitely Chris Wilkie, who's the Global Advocacy Manager for the Waterkeeper Alliance. And we'll do that in partnership with the Waterkeeper Alliance. So you can stay tuned for that in November. I think it's the 8th I think it starts the 8th of November. I have to check. Yeah.
That's great, Casey. But we will try to amplify your platform through
Mhm.
Reset social media as well while you're at COP 28.
Yeah.
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 And
Thank you.
Anna's no longer on our call with us, but her conference is coming up October the 6th. Casey, you're part of that too, I think.
Yes.
Climate
Yes, and it should be on the
Climate
line.
conversation.
In fact, we're preparing a movie, a 10-minute movie for that to premiere at that conference. So we're in the throes of it now. We're starting to film it now. A 10-minute movie on climate change called The Urgency of Now.
That's Maria's message, urgency. So thank you all, everyone, for coming. And we look forward to seeing you on future Reset conversations.